Friends, elitists, casual fans, lend me your ears. I'm Don1151, presenting Part 3, Chapter 6, my Fire Emblem 10 hard mode 0% gross playthrough. And because we're back with the Dawn Brigade in this chapter, here to help me navigate one of the hardest chapters in this game is Raisins.
Oh, hello. Thank you, Don, for having me on the show for another Dawn Brigade map.
So, up until now, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn has been a pretty casual romp through Tellius. Sure, there have been a handful of tricky scenarios, particularly if we care about getting the lowest turn counts, but every chapter has felt like a short and sweet breeze. 3-6, though, is where Radiant Dawn takes off its kid gloves and says, "No more Mr. Nice Guy, it's time for a beatdown." I think every casual player remembers this chapter vividly for its huge difficulty spike, and this chapter wasn't a walk in the park for me either. But not only that, 3-6 marks a point in the game where almost every subsequent map is substantially longer and harder in 0% growths than the ones before. So Raisins, why don't you give us a brief overview about why this chapter is so hard?
Yeah, so 3-6 suddenly thrusts you back into the Dawn Brigade, who hasn't seen a chapter since 1-E, and it puts you into 3-6, which is a map full of laguz in the fog of war. And every single laguz is essentially as powerful as Jared, the boss of 1-E, which is the last enemy that these guys fought. Essentially, every single cat has the same attack. Every single tiger has the same attack as Jared, except plus 10, so even higher. And then they all have pretty similar bulk and AS as well. Furthermore, we have to kill 46 of them, and it's in the fog of war, so it's kind of hard to spot them as well. Now, 46 enemies is actually a sort of interesting objective because the map only has 34 to begin with, so in order to low turn count the map, we actually need to push very aggressively into the map's borders, into the zones where the reinforcements will spawn, so that we can kill the reinforcements on the turn that they appear. Pushing so deep into the map will be a little bit more difficult than it was on 1-E, because the Dawn Brigade has also just lost very many of its powerful tools. They've lost Nyla, they've lost Raphael, they've lost the Laguz Emancipation Alliance, they've lost the Black Knight, and also Ilyana ran away with 7 or 9 of their best items in order to deliver them all to the Fail Mercenaries, because those guys suck and need our stuff, and so we're just left over with whatever scraps are remaining. So, Don, what do we have to push into the map?
Well, Raisins, we do have the rest of the Dawn Brigade, and with their powers combined, maybe they can add up to more than the sum of their parts. Everyone is going to have a role to play in this chapter, and by that I really do mean literally everyone, even the trash units like Fiona and Meg, and the 5 yellow NPC-controlled ally units that we get at the start of this chapter, which you can see on the screen right now. One of the benefits that we have is we're facing enemies that are all laguz instead of Bjork, and so while they are transformed, even though they all have the stats of a 1 endgame boss or better, fortunately if we can fight them when they are untransformed, or get them untransformed somehow, then they become much weaker and relatively defenseless. And because of this tier distribution of enemy quality, we can therefore classify our Dawn Brigade units into 4 distinct categories. We have the carries, who excel at combat and durability and can therefore fight on both player phase and enemy phase against the enemy transformed laguz. We have opportunists, who are units who do not have the stats to stand up to transform laguz on enemy phase, but they do have the combat parameters to pick off untransformed laguz or to deal significant damage to them and then duck safely behind our front lines. Then we have a handful of healers whose roles are pretty self-explanatory. And finally, a complement of flunkies, who fulfill myriad utility roles that are rather unorthodox and unique to this chapter.
Our carries for this map are going to be Volg, Soth, and Zihark. Volg and Soth's job will be to work together to secure the Center East Island, and later to push as far northeast as possible in order to get a bunch of laguz kills that way. Now, Volg is far and away the strongest character on the team, especially when transformed with his full transformation bonuses. I say full transformation bonuses because we chose to remove Wildheart at the start of the map. Wildheart would allow Volg to transform at any time, but he would only get 1.5 times stats as opposed to times 2 stats. And he actually needs the full transformation bonuses from his double laguz stats in order to 1-round tigers, 1-round cats, and survive the enemies that he needs to fight. We also give Volg the Beast Foe skill so that he can meet these offensive benchmarks. This does mean that we need to be eating all of Yggdrasil on Volg for the first 2 turns rather than killing anybody, but that's totally fine because we have Soth to cover for him in the meantime. Now, Soth's stats are a lot worse than Volg's. He has exactly enough attack to 1-round transformed tigers, or oddly enough untransformed cats, and enough bulk to survive exactly 1 attack from a tiger or exactly 2 attacks from a cat. So this happens to be just enough to hold off the enemies while Volg is getting ready, but after Volg gets ready, Soth will definitely transition into a more supportive role where he'll be delivering range attacks or just picking off very minor problematic enemies.
Rounding out our carries is Zihark, who just got a very timely promotion on turn 2. We weren't able to get him to level 10 on bonus experience alone. We got him to exactly level 9 with 43 experience, and this is exactly where 2 kills lets him reach level 10 in order for him to promote ASAP in this chapter and reap the benefits of being a tier 3 True Blade instead of being a tier 2 Swordmaster. So whereas Volg and Soth are just effective damage go burr, Zihark's offense is a lot more complicated to get to the point where we can consider him reliable. The basis of his offense in this chapter is crit stacking, which we need several ingredients to make work. The first is his Forged Steel Sword from 1 endgame, that gives him plus 15 crit. The second is a class bonus from being a True Blade, that's plus 20 compared to the plus 10 that Swordmaster would give. And the major component of his crit rate is from the skill Wrath. So this means that he needs consistent setups to enter Wrath HP. This is funnily enough where his biorhythm curve still works to his advantage. Zihark is in worse biorhythm for most of this map, which means that he has a very poor ability to dodge enemies. Most of the enemies will have 80 plus hit on him if he's not in a thicket and if he isn't receiving any supports. So that means that he'll just take a shot, get brought down to Wrath HP by like a tiger, and then it's time for him to go to town. So with all of these things set up, Zihark has over 90 crit on the enemies, and with the extra strength that he gained from promotion, he reliably 3-shots transform cats and 4-shots transform tigers. So he doesn't need to get, for example, a double crit to 1-round enemy tigers. One drawback with this setup is that Zihark is not as bulky as Volg. In fact, he can pretty much only get 1 kill per enemy phase and then 1 kill per player phase, but honestly, that is much better than almost everyone else.
The next broad category of units are the so-called opportunist units. These are player phase offense units who can deal a large amount of damage and have some mechanism to keep them safe from harm on enemy phase. These units are Jill, Nolan, and Leonardo. So Jill with her Brave Axe can 1-round KO any untransformed tigers and basically doesn't have the stats to do anything else. So oftentimes she's just looking around for an untransformed tiger, will pick it off with a Brave Axe, and will dart back to safety. Against transformed enemies, her stats are just simply too low. She can't kill anything. And even if we had given her stat boosters or Beast Foe in order to meet the offensive benchmarks, her hit rate is actually just completely garbage against them, and the strat is overall way too unreliable. Even the task of 1-rounding untransformed tigers is still a little bit sus, since the tigers get to counterattack with a kick. In order to ensure her survival on the map, we gave her the Imbue skill, which lets her regen 3 HP at the start of every turn. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it's actually just enough to make the difference and allow her to succeed the map every single time. Those who've been following the series closely might also remember in 1-7, Dawn mentioned the need for an exactly 18-use hand axe, and Jill sets that up on turn 2. Our other 2 blue opportunist units are Nolan and Leonardo, who travel to the East Island with Soth and Volg. Both of these units can deal a lot of damage from range with either the crossbow or the Lunasod. The Lunasod is a legendary bow that's been given to Leonardo and gives him plus 5 speed whenever he equips it, which allows him to double a bunch of the untransformed enemies and deal crap tons of damage from range. Now, unlike Jill, these 2 guys are stuck on the ground and are very immobile, and so we need to protect them the old-fashioned way. This is a bit easier to do since they go on the island with 2 carries and with all these other yellow halberdiers.
Yeah, shoutouts to some of the yellow units in this chapter because they are the best opportunists that we have. Especially the sniper over on the left-hand side of the map, who was critical in supporting Jill and Zihark if they had neither the HP nor the actions to kill all of the enemies that they had to kill to stay safe. The halberdiers that we baited over to the right side of the map on turn 1, they are also going to end up swarming all of the untransformed laguz that Leonardo and Nolan are going to weaken, and help pick them off so that our vulnerable units can remain safe. There are several other measures to consider when trying to maximize the safety of playable units. The first is knowing where the enemies appear and on what turns, and the best way to do that is to look at an online map on Fire Emblem WOD, shoutouts to them. The second best way is just a lot of trial and error. Something else to take into account is quirks in enemy AI. Not everyone bum rushes you. There's a couple of enemies, including one cat that was taken care of on the prior enemy phase, that only move to attack units within 1/2 of their total movement range. So that's why even though Leonardo looked like he was about to die, he was actually safe. And then the last thing to take into account are the enemy movement ranges and their mobility penalties in terrain. This is very particular to this chapter because there's differences in how the enemies take movement penalties depending on whether they're transformed or untransformed. Transformed Beast Laguz take 5 penalty from Swamp, but only 1 penalty from plain terrain and thickets, whereas when they're untransformed, they actually have more lenient movement in Swamp, but a little bit less lenient movement in thickets. So if there's an enemy who has max gauge but is untransformed, then they could potentially sneak up on you when you might not expect it.
The last thing keeping us safe are our 3 healers, Micaiah, Laura, and the Yellow Bishop. Micaiah and Laura are under our control, and they heal exactly 18 with either the heal staff or the physics staff. Pretty much all of this healing needs to go to Zihark over various different points, sometimes, split up over the course of the start of the player phase or the end of the player phase in order to both ensure that he can stay alive and to ensure that his Wrath is timed properly whenever we need him to be in Wrath range. The Yellow Bishop is a lot harder to control. Obviously, we don't have direct control over him, and none of Micaiah's direct commands are useful at all in manipulating his movement. There is only one tool we have, which is to rescue him. Rescuing the Bishop allows us to control his actions in 2 different ways. The first is we can make him not heal, which is very important on turn 1 since we need Zihark to remain on low HP for a Wrath benchmark. And the second thing we can do with rescuing him is we can move him to a particular part of the map, which we use during later portions of the map in order to ensure that he is in the east and he stays in the east where he can heal Soth or Volg as opposed to healing Zihark, who already has 2 healers dedicated to keeping him alive. All of this Yellow Bishop rescuing was done by Meg, who picked him up on turn 1 and moved him to the correct place.
At this point, we're about a turn and a half away from the end of the chapter, and we just pulled off something really cool, which is Soth stealing Mordecai's 2-use Laguz Stone. This is the only way for the Dawn Brigade to get any Laguz Stones for their Part 3 chapters. The funny thing here is that if you had killed off Lethe as a blue unit beforehand, she would be replaced by an enemy NPC boss who has a portrait and a name. His name is Kedgda, and he comes with the 3-use Laguz Stone. So that's one way in which you can get an extra Laguz Stone for the entire run. But because we have to keep Lethe alive, since our rules mandate as such, then we can't gain any Laguz Stones this way. We can only transfer them from one team to another. After Soth pulled off his daring heist, we do have to finish the chapter itself. The Black Knight showed up near our starting point fashionably late, and this is a very inconvenient position, which is why Jill had to take a pause from sniping untransformed tigers in order to go back and help the Black Knight hitch a ride. She can then fly up north and drop him off in part of the map that was previously not covered by Zihark, Soth, or Volg. And the Black Knight is just as impervious and powerful as he was before, one-rounding everything he touches. We just need to make sure the enemies aren't distracted by any other target. And that's part of the reason why Aaron is there to help corral the yellow sniper. On some previous turns, his role was also to prevent the yellow sniper from advancing too far forward so that Zihark can do his thing unobstructed.
And that's the story of how the Dawn Brigade came together as a team and valiantly defeated the evil cat people in Chapter 3-6. Even Edward right here at the end is getting a kill on a cat with his legendary Calibolg sword. There is also one quick direct command done at the very end from Micaiah. She directs the yellow units to just pile on north of our little trio of Dawn Brigade guys in the south. That's because there is a tiger in the Fog of War who can leap out and kill them, and so we just pack the yellow units around them in order to body block the tiger from attacking. Aside from that, on this turn 7 player phase, all of our player units are in position. We are in range of 8 enemies to kill on this enemy phase, although we only need to kill 7 to end the map. And the only other thing to do to prepare for the future is we did a bunch of trade commands and switched around inventories to ensure that none of the Dawn Brigade units have ranged attacks or have ranged weapons if we can help it. This is mostly to make Chapter 3-7 easier for routing the Dawn Brigade units and just counterattacking them in melee. And with that, the chapter is pretty much done. We just watched this enemy phase where 7 cats die. The only thing we really missed in the chapter, so to speak, is a Brave Bow treasure that was in the southwest. We could have picked it up, but it wouldn't have been useful anywhere in the rest of the run, so there wasn't really any purpose to picking it up. As far as the strat's reliability goes, turns 1 and 2 are kind of sus, but after that, the only real chance that we suffer is that Zihark usually has to hit 190 crit out of 2 attacks, which is a 99% chance of success and overall pretty reliable. And that makes 3-6 on 0% growths completed in 7 turns. Don, we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.